What if I told you that your need to be right has cost you the very connection you're starving for? That every time you win the argument, you lose a piece of your humanity? Sit with that for a second. Because I have. And it broke me before it saved me. I remember the night so vividly, like it's burned into my memory. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no slamming of doors, no storming out of the room. It was quiet. That heavy, suffocating kind of quiet that fills a space after two people have said too much, or maybe not enough, of what truly mattered. I had just made my point, neatly, logically, undeniably. I remember the satisfaction that flared up in my chest. I had won. I had the better argument. I had the facts lined up like soldiers. And for a fleeting second, I felt powerful, victorious, like I had secured my place on some invisible scoreboard of rightness. But then I looked across at the person I loved, someone who had always been my safe place, and I saw it, that look. The one that said, "You've built a wall between us, and I'm too tired to climb over it." What I had done was push them further away, all for the sake of proving my point. I sat there in that awful silence, feeling the weight of it, the way the room seemed colder, the way my heart felt heavier. I realized in that moment that being right wasn't worth the cost. Not if the cost was this loneliness, this distance, this fracture in the connection I valued most. You know, I think so many of us have been there. We armor ourselves with knowledge, with logic, with certainty, because it feels safer. Because being wrong feels like exposure, like failure, like weakness. Psychology tells us that when we feel shame creeping in, that fear of being small, of being seen as less than, our instinct is to defend, to protect, to prove. The need to be right isn't really about truth. It's about survival. But here's the heartbreaking reality I had to face that night. When we choose being right over being real, we don't just lose the argument. We lose intimacy, we lose trust. We lose the very connection we're desperate to protect. That was the night I realized that no clever argument, no perfect logic, no victory in a debate could ever feel as good as simply being close. And that was the night I started learning, painfully, slowly, how to let go. It started like so many fights do, small, almost insignificant, a difference of opinion, a clash of perspective, but somehow, within minutes, it turned into something bigger. He said something, I countered. He raised his voice slightly, I sharpened my words. I could feel it. That heat rising in my chest, that fire in my gut, the undeniable urge to win. It wasn't even about the topic anymore. Not really. It was about proving I wasn't wrong, about making sure I didn't look foolish or weak or uninformed, about making sure I didn't have to sit with the discomfort of being on the losing side. And I went for it. Every fact I could summon, every angle I could twist, every clever retort I could muster. I threw them like punches in a ring, determined to come out victorious. And when I finally finished, when there were no more points to make, no more words left to hurl, I looked at him, expecting, I don't even know what I was expecting. Respect, admiration, acknowledgement that I'd won. But all I saw was exhaustion. All I heard was silence, that crushing, suffocating silence that follows after something inside a relationship fractures just a little too much. He didn't say anything. He didn't storm out. He just looked at me. And in that look, I saw the weight of everything my words had cost. That silence lasted longer than the fight itself. Hours, maybe days. And in that space, I sat with the aftermath of my so-called victory. The hollow ache in my chest, the gnawing regret, the realization that I hadn't proved I was strong, I'd proved I was scared. Because underneath all that arguing, all that insistence on being right, was fear. Fear of being seen as less. Fear of losing control. Fear of being exposed, vulnerable, human. We don't talk about that enough, do we? That so often, when we dig in our heels, when we can't let go of the need to win, it's not because we're confident, it's because we're terrified. Psychology calls it ego defense. We defend our position because our position feels tied to our worth. If I'm wrong, then maybe I'm not enough. If I'm wrong, maybe I'll be rejected, but here's what that silence taught me. Winning doesn't feel like winning if it means standing alone in the aftermath. What I truly craved wasn't to be right. It was to be seen, to be understood, to be held in my imperfection. And I realized that every time I chose my pride over the relationship, I was walking further away from that. That fight and the long, echoing silence that followed became one of the greatest teachers of my life, because it taught me this: no argument is worth more than the people we love. And sometimes, the real strength isn't in proving our point. It's in choosing connection over conquest. It was one of those ordinary mornings, the kind where everything feels rushed, the sun barely up, dishes in the sink, shoes scattered by the door. I was already tired before the day had even begun. And there she stood, my daughter, small and determined, holding her jacket in her hands. I told her, with that clipped, impatient tone that creeps in when we're overwhelmed, "Put it on, it's cold outside." She looked up at me, eyes wide, voice soft but steady. "I don't want to, Mama. I'm not cold." And there it was, that fire rising in me, that reflex, that unthinking need to insist, to correct, to control. I rattled off my reasons: the temperature, her health, my experience. I made my case like a lawyer, stacking my logic higher and higher, sure that if I just explained enough, she'd see I was right, that I knew better. But then she broke, not with defiance, not with tantrum, with tears. Those quiet tears that catch in a child's throat when they feel unseen, unheard. And she said something that stopped me in my tracks, something that still echoes in my heart. "Why don't you ever just listen to me?" And the world seemed to stop. I froze there in that moment, jacket in hand, logic abandoned, and I saw it all so clearly, how my need to be right had blinded me. This wasn't about the jacket. It wasn't about the weather. It was about my need to control, to be certain, to silence her voice so I wouldn't have to feel the discomfort of uncertainty, the vulnerability of letting her make her own choices. I had told myself I was protecting her, but the truth, I was protecting me. Protecting myself from the fear that maybe I didn't know best, that maybe my way wasn't the only way, that maybe, just maybe, I could trust her too. Psychologists call this autonomy support, the idea that when we allow our children or anyone we love to express themselves, to make choices, to have a voice, we help them build resilience, confidence, and trust. When we silence them, even with the best intentions, we teach them that their truth doesn't matter. And we rob ourselves of the chance to really know them. I knelt down that day. I looked into her teary eyes, and I said, "I'm sorry, you're right, I wasn't listening. Tell me what you feel." And she did, and I listened, really listened. And something shifted between us. Something tender, something true. And here's what that day taught me, something I carry in every relationship. Sometimes love looks like stepping back, like letting go, like hearing the truth in someone else's voice, even when it scares us. Because connection, the kind that lasts, doesn't come from controlling or correcting. It comes from listening, from honoring the humanity in each other, jacket or no jacket. There's a kind of betrayal we don't talk about enough, the one that doesn't happen between you and someone else, the one that happens quietly, in the space between who you are and who you pretend to be. I lived that betrayal for years, and I didn't even see it for what it was. I thought I was being strong. I thought I was being smart. I thought I was protecting myself. It would happen in those moments after the heat of an argument cooled, when I was alone with my thoughts, replaying what I'd said, how I'd insisted, how I'd fought to be right. I'd go over it again and again, as if I was trying to convince myself I had done the right thing. But beneath that surface bravado was this ache, a deep, gnawing emptiness. I'd feel it in my chest, like a weight. And I knew in those quiet moments that I hadn't really stood up for myself. I hadn't fought for truth. I had fought for my ego. And in doing so, I had abandoned the part of me that longed for connection, for softness, for belonging. Every time I bulldozed a conversation, every time I silenced someone's truth so I could preserve my own sense of superiority, I betrayed the values I said I held dear: kindness, empathy, understanding. I betrayed the self who wanted to be known, not for being right, but for being real, for being someone who could be trusted with another person's heart. The hardest part? I could feel it. I could feel that betrayal sitting in my bone. That quiet voice inside, the one we all have, kept whispering, "This isn't who you want to be. This isn't what matters." But I ignored it, because being vulnerable, admitting I didn't know everything, that I could be wrong, felt too risky, too raw. Psychologists call this self-concept dissonance, the tension we feel when our actions don't align with who we believe ourselves to be. And the more we betray ourselves, the more that tension grows. We start to feel hollow, disconnected, not just from others, but from our own souls. It took me a long time to see that what I was really seeking wasn't victory, it was peace. Not the peace that comes from winning, but the peace that comes from living in alignment with my truth, from showing up, flawed and human, and choosing love over pride. And here's the deepest truth I learned. Every time we choose being right over being real, we don't just push others away, we lose pieces of ourselves. But every time we choose honesty, humility, and connection, we come home to who we were always meant to be. There came a day, after too many sleepless nights replaying conversations, after too many moments where I saw the hurt in someone's eyes and felt the weight of my own pride, when I finally did something I'd spent my whole life avoiding. I said it out loud. I might be wrong. And I need you to understand, it didn't feel graceful, it didn't feel noble, it felt like stepping off a cliff. My heart raced, my palms were sweaty, and everything inside me screamed to snatch the words back before they hung too long in the air. But I didn't. I let them stay. I let myself stay. And what happened next wasn't what I expected. The person I said it to didn't gloat. They didn't take advantage of my admission. They didn't throw it back in my face. Instead, their entire posture softened. Their shoulders relaxed. Their voice gentled. The wall between us, that invisible but unmissable wall I'd built with my certainty, started to crumble. There was no winner that day. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like the greatest relief. We talked. Really talked. Not to win, not to score points, but to understand. And in that space, that raw, honest space where neither of us needed to be right, we found each other again. Psychologists call this intellectual humility. It's the willingness to admit that our beliefs and views could be incomplete or flawed. It's not weakness. In fact, studies show it's linked to better relationships, deeper learning, and stronger connections. Because when we let go of the need to be right, we make room for growth. We make room for truth, not just our truth, but shared truth. And here's what I want you to know with all my heart. There is a quiet courage in saying, I might be wrong. A courage that doesn't need applause or validation. A courage that builds bridges instead of burning them. A courage that invites closeness instead of creating distance. Because at the end of the day, people won't remember the times you proved them wrong. They'll remember the moments you made them feel safe, heard, and valued. Even when it meant setting your pride aside. And that is the kind of courage that changes everything. So today, I invite you, the next time you feel that urge to win, that fire to be right, pause, breathe. Ask yourself, do I want to be right or do I want to be close? Because connection, the real, messy, soul-filling kind, lives on the other side of letting go.